There are new bombshell claims today from royal insiders who say King Charles's cancer is incurable and he will likely die with the disease.
The palace had survived silence before, but this silence felt different. When William finally stepped forward and confirmed the devastating news about Charles' recovery battle, the room seemed to lose its breath. This was not just a health update. It was the moment the monarchy realized the king's struggle had moved from private concern to national consequence, and nothing inside the crown would remain untouched. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William knew the words would wound people before they steadied them. He stood before a small group of senior aides with his hands locked together, his voice calm, and his face carrying the weight of a son trying not to break. The crown, meaning the royal institution, and everything it represents to the country, needed clarity. The Prince of Wales, the title given to the direct heir to the throne, now had to confirm what palace silence could no longer hide. Charles's recovery had suffered a serious setback, forcing the king to reduce major public duties and hand expanded leadership responsibilities to his son. Charles had already felt the truth before the words reached the public. The monarch received the prepared statement privately, read one line twice, then set the page down without speaking. Days of cancelled engagements had led to this moment. Quiet changes to the royal calendar had already told the story before anyone dared to say it aloud. Aides had moved meetings, shifted appearances, and rearranged ceremonial duties with careful faces, because every adjustment carried the same hidden message. The king was not recovering as smoothly as the palace had hoped, and the future king was being asked to stand closer to the center than anyone expected. Camilla heard the confirmation from inside a private sitting room, and her expression hardened before she said a word. The queen consort understood the danger immediately. This was not only about protecting Charles from strain, it was also about William gaining public authority at the exact moment the monarchy felt exposed. She had stood beside the king through years of judgment, but now the palace seemed to be asking another figure to become the steady face of national confidence. That realization cut deep, because loyalty and influence were suddenly no longer the same thing. The most shocking detail was not the reduced schedule. It was the duties William would now carry. Several engagements once reserved only for Charles would pass to the prince, placing him before the public as more than a supportive heir. The future king would not replace his father, but he would begin to represent him in ways that changed the emotional balance of the family. And as the announcement rippled through the palace walls, the people closest to Charles were forced to confront what this recovery battle truly cost them. Behind every royal announcement is a private wound no statement can fully hide. William carries the weight of duty. Camilla faces the fear of losing influence beside the man she fought decades to stand with. Catherine watches her husband become the monarchy's steady hand, while knowing the burden may change him. And Charles, at the center of it all, must face a truth no crown can soften. William stepped away from the briefing with the stillness of a man who had just crossed a line he never wanted to reach. The prince moved into a private corridor, stopped before the turn that led toward Charles, and let the silence press against him. He was not only the heir, meaning the person next in line to become monarch. He was now the visible stabilizer of the monarchy, the person the palace needed the public to trust while the king focused on recovery. That mattered because a nervous country does not look only for statements. It looks for a face that seems steady enough to carry fear without showing it. Catherine saw the strain before anyone else named it. She placed a hand on William's arm, and the prince looked down for a moment, as if duty had finally become too heavy to hold alone. She knew what the announcement had done to him. It had turned a son's private fear into a national message. It had forced him to speak about Charles not only as a father, but as the monarch whose health now shaped the rhythm of the crown. Catherine reminded him quietly that strength did not mean feeling nothing. William listened, but his eyes had already changed. The future king was learning that public confidence often begins where private heartbreak is buried. Charles waited with the question no one had dared to ask him directly. When William entered, the king studied his son's face and asked whether the public would see this as weakness. The prince did not rush his answer. He knew a soft lie would insult them both. He told Charles the country would see it as a turning point, and the monarch absorbed those words like a verdict he had expected but still feared. That answer mattered because it stripped away comfort. It told the king that recovery was no longer only medical. It had become constitutional, emotional, and deeply personal. Camilla understood the shift with painful clarity. The Queen Consort saw that the announcement did not simply protect Charles from strain. It strengthened William at the exact moment palace loyalties were being tested. Public sympathy rested with the king, but operational trust was moving toward the prince. And to understand why William's confirmation carried such force, the story must return to the private incident that made silence impossible. Every crisis has a moment everyone later remembers. For this one, it was not a public speech or a balcony appearance. It was a private dinner at Windsor, where Charles tried to appear steady, Camilla tried to control the room, and William noticed the pause that no one else wanted to name. That evening became the trigger, the quiet point of no return. Charles arrived determined to make the room believe he was stronger than he felt. The dinner had been arranged at Windsor, a royal residence often used for private family moments and formal planning, to project unity before a demanding week of engagements. Those engagements mattered because the king's presence still carried national reassurance. When the monarch appeared steady, the country felt steady. When he vanished from the calendar, questions began to grow faster than answers. Camilla understood that danger, and the Queen Consort tried to keep the conversation warm, controlled, and moving forward. William noticed the change before the others allowed themselves to react. Charles stopped mid-sentence, gripped the edge of the table, and stared down as though the next word had become too heavy to lift. The prince watched his father struggle to finish a simple thought, and his face changed before the air could hide it. Then the king said the words that froze the family. He was too exhausted to complete the next week's royal schedule. The schedule, meaning the official list of duties and appearances expected of senior royals, was not just a diary. It was the public rhythm of the crown. Camilla tried to rescue the moment. She leaned into the conversation, softened her voice, and began to suggest that the week could be adjusted quietly. But Charles asked for the room to be still. The monarch did not raise his voice. He did not need to. That one request left the Queen Consort shaken, because it proved this was not ordinary tiredness, and not another private worry to be managed behind polished doors. William looked at him, then looked away, because the son had seen what the future king could no longer ignore. Catherine later urged William to push for clarity. She did it in a private conversation, not as a power play, but as a wife watching uncertainty eat into the family from the inside. Her warning mattered because silence was no longer protecting Charles. It was exposing him. A senior aide then gave William the final blow through a documented internal briefing. This had not been the first private warning. It was only the first warning the family could no longer pretend away. That Windsor dinner became the buried spark. But once the family could no longer pretend the king was recovering on schedule, the question became brutal. Who had the courage to say it aloud? The palace confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with a chair being moved back from a polished table. William stood on one side, Camilla on the other, and Charles's recovery battle sat between them like an unspoken verdict. What followed was not merely a disagreement over schedules. It was a clash over love, loyalty, image, and control. William had forced the meeting because silence had become dangerous. He told the room that Charles's reduced duties had to be confirmed publicly before speculation damaged the crown, the royal institution that depends on public trust as much as ceremony. The prince knew the risk. A health statement could calm the nation, but it could also make the king look fragile. Still, hiding the truth felt worse. It made every cancelled engagement look like a secret, and every changed plan feel like a warning no one had the courage to explain. Camilla did not accept that easily. The Queen Consort argued that the announcement should be softened, delayed, and framed as routine rest instead of a serious recovery setback. She spoke as a wife afraid for Charles, but also as a royal figure who understood how fast public concern could turn into panic. The calendar, meaning the official list of royal duties and appearances, had already been quietly altered. That mattered because the calendar was more than dates. It was the monarchy's heartbeat. If it changed too much, people would know something was wrong. William's voice sharpened when she resisted. He told Camilla that protecting Charles meant telling the country enough truth to stop the whispers. The prince did not say it cruelly, but he said it with force. He had seen his father grip the table at Windsor. He had read the briefing from doctors warning against continued strain. Several major engagements had already been reassigned, and pretending otherwise would only make the palace look frightened. William understood that fear could damage the monarchy faster than honesty. Camilla rose from her chair, wounded and defensive. She accused William of treating Charles like a symbol instead of a husband, and for a moment, the accusation landed hard. The queen consort had stood beside the king through storms that would have broken weaker bonds. She believed love meant shielding him. William believed love meant admitting he needed protection. Both were fighting for Charles, but they were fighting from opposite sides of the same wound. Charles entered near the end and heard the final exchange. The king looked at Camilla, then at William, and quietly said his son was right. The room changed instantly. Camilla went silent. William did not celebrate. With one quiet sentence from the king, the argument shifted from whether the prince should speak to how much authority he now truly held. Power inside a palace rarely moves with thunder. It moves through calendars, signatures, seating plans, and the names written beside royal duties. After William's confirmation, the shift begins almost silently. Aides lower their voices. Private secretaries adjust files. Camilla feels the floor beneath her role change, and William learns that responsibility can arrive looking less like victory than grief. William sat alone with the revised duty folder, then closed it slowly, as if the paper itself had become too heavy. He whispered that this was not how he wanted to lead. The folder mattered because it carried more than dates. It held key appearances, briefings, and ceremonial responsibilities, now moving from Charles's office to the prince's team. A ceremonial responsibility, in plain terms, is a public royal duty that shows continuity, respect, and national order. If the wrong person carries it too soon, the country feels the shift before anyone explains it. Charles watched him from across the room with pride and pain tangled together. The king knew William was ready, and that knowledge should have comforted him. Instead, it cut deep. Every reassigned briefing protected Charles from strain, but it also reminded the monarch that recovery had taken something from him. The king had spent his life preparing to carry the crown, and now his son was carrying parts of it while he remained nearby, grateful, wounded, and forced to accept the cost of survival. Camilla noticed the pattern before anyone said it plainly. The queen consort's requested appearances were reduced, while William's role widened with quiet force. She understood how palace power speaks. It does not always announce rejection. Sometimes it simply stops calling your name first. Camilla feared she was being pushed from the center at the very moment she believed Charles needed her closest. That fear mattered because her place beside the king had always been hard-won, and now support for him seemed to be measured through trust in another man. A palace advisor confirmed the truth during a private planning call recorded for the household file. The advisor said public confidence now depended on the prince looking calm, prepared, and visibly in command. The advisor repeated that Charles's dignity had to be protected by William's steadiness. That recorded warning turned strategy into destiny. It proved the shift was not gossip or mood. It was policy, shaped by fear, duty, and the need to keep the monarchy breathing. The machinery of the monarchy started moving behind William, but those left outside its center felt the impact first. And once power began to move, consequence followed close behind that same night, sharper than anyone inside dared admit. By morning, the announcement had become more than a statement. It had become a new reality. Doors opened for William. Calls arrived for Catherine. Charles was protected by a circle that felt smaller and more controlled. Camilla, once certain of her place beside the king, began to sense that every carefully chosen word now carried consequences she could not fully command. William's office received the first instructions before the day had fully settled. The prince was to prepare for a series of duties once expected to be handled by Charles, and every detail carried weight. A royal duty, in plain terms, is an official task performed on behalf of the monarchy, such as meeting leaders, attending ceremonies, or representing national unity. These duties mattered because they told the public who was steady, who was present, and who could be trusted when the king had to step back. William understood that every appearance would now be read as a signal. Palace staff moved quickly around the new reality. Briefing rooms were adjusted. Guest lists were reviewed. Public messaging was sharpened so Charles's reduced schedule would appear controlled rather than chaotic. The king's recovery could no longer be separated from the prince's readiness to lead, and that connection changed everything. If William looked calm, the monarchy looked calm. If he looked shaken, Charles's struggle would seem even more serious. That was the burden hidden beneath every polished phrase. Camilla felt the first consequence in a room that suddenly no longer waited for her. The queen consort sat alone after a planning meeting ended without her final approval, staring at an untouched cup of tea as the door closed. She did not need anyone to explain what had happened. The palace had not rejected her loudly. It had simply moved forward without needing her permission. That wounded her, because she had always believed her place beside Charles gave her influence when the king was vulnerable. Now vulnerability seemed to be giving William more authority instead. Catherine found William late that night with notes spread before him, his face drawn and his shoulders tense. She saw at once that the prince was not energized by power. He was burdened by what it meant. A private palace memo, circulated through the household office and preserved in the internal file, placed William at the center of national reassurance. The memo made clear that his confirmation was not just a response to Charles's setback. It was the beginning of a new royal phase. Charles remained the reason for every decision, but William had become the answer to every fear. After the palace absorbed the shock, father and son were left with the one conversation no official statement could replace. The turning point came not before cameras, not before courtiers, and not beneath the weight of ceremony. It came in a private room where Charles sat with the exhaustion he could no longer disguise, and William stood before him not as the future king, but as a son. In that stillness, the crown became painfully human. Charles had asked for the meeting himself, and that alone carried meaning. The king understood the announcement had changed the emotional balance of the family, because once William confirmed the setback, everyone began looking at the prince differently. The crown, in plain language, means the monarchy as an institution, not just the person wearing the title. That mattered because Charles was not only protecting his health now, he was protecting the public idea of royal strength while facing the private truth of his own limits. William entered without advisors, without prepared lines, and without the careful language that had filled every room since the crisis began. The prince looked at Charles and waited, because this was not a briefing. It was a father and son standing at the edge of a future neither of them had chosen. The king admitted, in a low voice, that his body had forced the monarchy to move faster than his heart was ready to accept. Charles said the words slowly, as though each one cost him pride. William listened, and the future king did not interrupt. Charles had spent his life preparing for responsibility, but nothing had prepared him for handing pieces of it away while still alive to feel the loss. The monarch knew William's rise was necessary, yet necessity did not make it painless. He had waited so long to serve as king, and now recovery had placed limits around the role he had finally reached. That mattered because royal duty had always been his identity. To reduce that duty felt like reducing part of himself. William stepped closer and told him that stepping back was not surrender. The words struck Charles harder than any official statement could have done. The king lowered his eyes, then nodded once, and that small movement carried more power than a public declaration. In that moment, Charles gave William his blessing to carry more of the public burden, not as a temporary substitute, but as the crown's necessary steady hand. William promised he would protect his father's dignity, even while guiding the monarchy through uncertainty Charles could not fully control. The prince did not sound triumphant. He sounded loyal. Their private understanding gave the palace a new emotional center. But outside the gates, the world had already begun reacting. What began as a family crisis now belonged to the public, and the nation responded with a force the palace could not ignore. By sunrise, the story had escaped the palace completely. It was on front pages, morning broadcasts, phone screens, and whispered conversations outside royal gates. The country did not just hear that Charles was struggling, it saw William standing where a son never wants to stand too soon. And in that image, the public read both heartbreak and succession. William watched the first broadcast in silence, his jaw tight, as the commentators replayed his confirmation again and again. The prince did not move when one presenter called him the crown's calm center. The phrase sounded polished, but it landed like pressure. The crown, meaning the monarchy as a living institution beyond any single person, now depended on whether the public believed William could steady the moment without making Charles look diminished. That mattered because royal confidence is fragile. Once people begin to sense panic behind palace words, every silence becomes louder. Catherine stood beside him without interrupting. She understood the new weight settling around her husband, and William knew she understood it before she said anything. The public was no longer seeing him only as a devoted son or future king. It was seeing the prince through a heavier lens, as the man expected to protect the monarchy while Charles fought a private battle in public view. Catherine's stillness gave him strength, but it also reminded him how much this moment had taken from their private life. Charles saw the coverage later and kept his face composed, though the king could not miss what had changed. The palace statement had confirmed that he would continue recovery while William assumed additional duties, and that statement mattered because it linked the monarch's health to the future leadership of the royal family. A public statement, in simple terms, is the official message the palace gives to the country when private matters become national concern. This one did not simply explain absence. It announced a shift. Camilla noticed the same shift with a colder kind of clarity. The Queen Consort saw the newspaper front page that captured the public mood. William, in a dark suit beneath the headline, "The Sun Steps Forward," with Charles pictured smaller beside him. She understood why that image struck so deeply. It made the recovery battle feel like legacy in motion. And it made the prince appear not waiting, but already carrying. Outside Buckingham Palace, a quiet crowd gathered with flowers and handwritten cards. They did not come in panic. They came in solemn recognition that something royal had changed. And once legacy entered the room, every private fear, every public duty, and every royal sacrifice demanded a final verdict. In the end, William's confirmation did not break the monarchy. It exposed its most painful truth. The crown survives because people inside it absorb burdens before the public fully understands them. Charles's recovery battle became more than a health struggle. It became the moment a father had to step back, a son had to step forward, and a family had to accept the cost of continuity. Charles looked over the revised schedule one final time, and the silence around him felt heavier than any applause he had ever received. The king understood what the paper meant before his pen touched it. The schedule, in plain language, was the official plan of royal duties, appearances, and responsibilities that showed the country who would carry the monarchy's public face. This one mattered because it did not simply reduce his workload. It confirmed that William would become the visible shield of the crown, while his father fought to recover behind guarded doors. William received the approved plan with both hands, then held it for a moment without speaking. The prince understood that Charles had not handed him victory. The monarch had handed him trust, and trust could feel heavier than power. The future king knew the country needed calm, but he also knew calm would cost him something private. Every public appearance would now carry a hidden message. Charles remained king, but William had become the answer to the fear people were afraid to say out loud. Camilla's role was not erased, but it was changed. The Queen Consort had to stand beside Charles emotionally, while William carried more of the crown publicly. That shift wounded her, because she had fought for a place beside the king, and now the most visible burden of protection had moved toward his son. Yet even Camilla understood, in the quietest part of herself, that this was no longer about pride. It was about keeping Charles steady and keeping the monarchy from looking lost. Catherine became William's quiet anchor in the final hours of that decision. She reminded him that leadership born from sadness could still become strength. The prince needed those words because he was not stepping forward out of ambition. He was stepping forward because Charles could not carry everything alone anymore. That truth gave the moment its deepest power. The family had stopped pretending pain was weakness, and the monarchy had chosen stability over denial. The verdict was definitive. This moment marked the monarchy's passage from uncertainty into disciplined transition. Charles's struggle revealed vulnerability. William's confirmation delivered stability. Camilla learned that love and influence were no longer the same thing. Catherine stood beside a husband changed by duty, and the crown endured because the family finally stopped hiding from the truth. There was no unresolved ending here. The palace changed, Charles accepted the limits of recovery, William accepted the weight of duty, and the monarchy moved forward under the shadow of sacrifice. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.